Welcome back, students. Miss Eaglin here. We're resuming our reading of Is Bigger Government Better Government? And the Yes Side by Jeff Madrick, The Case for Big Government. We're actually on page 44, and we're in the second complete paragraph where Mr. Madrick is trying to build his case for why the government helps the country as a whole, including business. The most productive way to address rising global competition is not trade restrictions per se, but for the government to invest in the nation. Consumer spending leaks to foreign imports, and business investment leaks across the border. But potential returns to the economy from spending on transportation projects are at this point significant, partly due to years of neglect, and the jobs created to implement them largely stay at home. The proportion of the federal budget spent on investment in the nation, including transportation, science, technology, and energy, are well down from the levels of the 1970s. Federal spending on education as a proportion of GDP, again, gross domestic product, fell under Clinton, but was raised under his successor, George Bush, and it remains slightly higher as a proportion of GDP than it was in the 1970s. Overall, public investment equaled nearly 3% of GDP in the 1970s, which would come to more than $400 billion today. Under Clinton, it fell to half of that proportion, and under Bush, it rose but remains at less than 2% of GDP. Merely raising it to the 1970s level would produce $140 billion more a year to spend. To re-emphasize, such spending usually creates domestic jobs, that means jobs at home, and builds future productivity at the same time. To take one estimate, a House Transportation Committee report cites a Federal Highway Administration model that claims that a $75 billion investment will create more than 3.5 million jobs and $464 billion in additional nationwide sales. Every $1 billion, in other words, yields 47,500 jobs and another $6 billion in sales. Spending has been so inadequate that such estimates can be accepted confidently. The Society of Civil Engineers suggests that much of America's infrastructure should get a grade of D. While these studies are hardly definitive, they are suggestive of the possibilities. The most exciting potential returns are for high-quality pre-K education. A wide range of studies have been undertaken on several high-quality programs that have long been underway in the United States. The benefits of such programs include not only improving the ability of children to learn, but also long-term reduction in crime rates, reduced need for special education and repeating grades, and lower welfare enrollment rates. A conventional conservative economist such as James Heckman, a Nobel laureate who opposes college subsidies, nevertheless favors significant funding of preschool programs. Some estimate these programs create benefits that exceed the cost by 5 to 10 times. A highly sophisticated recent analysis by two economists estimates that if a high-quality program was instituted nationwide, the federal monies spent would be fully paid for in increased tax revenues due to improved incomes and would reduce welfare, crime, and special education expenses. In other words, it would pay for itself. As a consequence of neglect and change, an adequate agenda for America is a lengthy one, but it is not an anti-growth agenda. It favors growth. Growing personal income is more necessary to a full life than is recognized, in part because the cost of some key needs rise very fast, in part because a wealthy society can finance innovation, and in part because a wealthy populace will find it easier and more congenial to pay for communal needs through taxes. But for too long, mainstream economists have accepted the notion that more savings and technology will alone lead to faster growth. The agenda for government is therefore inappropriately limited. Government spending, for example, will allegedly erode savings. America has been able to test this economic philosophy for a full generation, and it has failed. Years of below par productivity growth, low and stagnating wages, inattention to basic needs, persistent poverty, and the undermining of assets necessary to future growth, including education, healthcare, energy alternatives, and transportation infrastructure, are the consequences. The gap between a growing economy and falling wages is the major contemporary mystery. Global competition and offshoring may explain part of the gap, but the trend began decades ago. Research shows that a gap in worker compensation and productivity began to open up slowly in the late 1980s. Typical workers got less than their historical share, while capital, or profits, and high-income workers got more. This gap widened explosively in the 2000s. Furthermore, there was little explanation as to why male incomes in particular failed especially poorly over this long period we have described. A major reason is the withdrawal of government from its traditional purposes. So that concludes our reading on the Yes side by Jeff Madrick. If you have questions, come see Miss Edelin, and I will be happy to go over any of the vocab or anything in the reading that you weren't clear on.